You're listening to the This Is Horror Podcast, episode number 1.
Welcome to the first This Is Horror Podcast. I'm Michael Wilson, and joining me are John Costello.
Hello.
And Dan Howarth.
All right.
And today we're going to be talking about the film Chained, directed by Jennifer Lynch, giving a rundown on it, discussing it, giving our thoughts, just having a bit of a banter, really. And then there'll also be an interview with Jennifer Lynch. So, technically, it's the 4th film that she's directed, but her 3rd film, Hiss, which is an Indian film, had a bit of controversy surrounding it, and at some point she actually disowned it, so...
Okay.
Yeah, Google that if you're interested.
She made it in India?
Well, it's an Indian film, so I think she made it in India.
Cool.
Haven't seen it. It's not horror, so not really the This Is Horror remit.
We don't want to know.
But the film before, Surveillance, was, and I'd wholeheartedly recommend that. So, if neither of you have seen it, you should.
It's on my to-do list.
All right.
Yeah, it'll end up on the Love Film list now. Thanks, Michael.
Yeah, no worries. And that's what we're here for. Helping everyone populate their Love Film list.
Okay.
John's here to help everyone populate. That might get cut. It might not. We'll have a discussion off camera, off podcast.
I resemble that remark.
So, as to give a quick rundown of Chained, as per the synopsis that we were very kindly sent from Anchor Bay. So it's about a 9-year-old Tim, also known as Rabbit, who's abducted by a taxi-driving serial killer, Bob, and he's played by Vincent D'Onofrio. And effectively, it's kind of an entrapment movie, would you say? Quite a claustrophobic film where Rabbit is being held throughout the duration by Bob.
Is entrapment the right word here? It just makes me think of that film with Catherine Zeta-Jones.
Yeah. And then once you start thinking of Catherine Zeta-Jones, you can't quite go from there.
Yeah, and unfortunately, Catherine Zeta-Jones does not make an appearance, and she does not do what John calls the honourable thing.
This is true. Never mind, back to the film.
Certainly falls into the Fritzl genre, doesn't it?
Oh, God. Well, if we...
This is going to need heavily editing, Michael. Yeah, in terms of the film, it's pretty claustrophobic. I mean, the majority of it takes place in the kitchen of the killer's home, doesn't it, really, for the most part? That's the main setting. It's where we see Rabbit, or Tim as he originally starts out, do most of his growing up, isn't it, really? He spends his entire adolescence pretty much maintaining the life of this killer. Cooking his meals, tidying up after him, bathing him in one of the more disturbing scenes in the film. I think it's fair to say. Certainly one of the more claustrophobic films that I've seen recently. Was that due to budget constraints? Could they have done something a bit more ambitious with the actual locations itself? I'm not really sure. You know, I would have liked to have seen more of the taxi driver out and about in the streets, seen more about his MO when it came to kind of picking girls up. I mean, we see at one point when he interacts with the father and son, and that brings back a lot of memories for him. I think I would have liked to have seen him in a few more situations like that to be able to understand him more in terms of the way he interacts with people, rather than learning more about his backstory through his dreams, really, to be honest. I'm not sure what you guys think about that.
Well, the Variety review said that there was no character development at all, and I kind of disagree with that, because whether you don't like the fact that it's a particular type of character development, or you think it's very superficial or stereotypical or whatever, the fact is that I think that the film does a fairly good job in trying to at least give some kind of a rationale for the killer through flashbacks to his past life, through abuses that he suffered when he was a child. But conversely, I'd say that that's also a fairly stereotypical device. I mean, we've seen this kind of serial killer before, haven't we? We've seen the kind of fat couch potato, slobby guy who's got no real life. He's a loner, and he just picks up women and kills them. How many times have we seen that?
I mean, the way that he became attached to Rabbit as the film progressed seemed to be reversing the whole Stockholm Syndrome device a little bit, because traditionally you'll more see the person who's being kept imprisoned kind of growing affectionate towards like the serial killer or whoever it is that has them hostage. But in this case, I felt that it was more Bob who actually was attached to Rabbit.
For reasons that don't become clear until later in the movie, whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing.
I thought the flashbacks, whilst you couldn't say it was wholly original, I did think that they worked well, and Jennifer could have gone for a very torture porn style movie, and I actually thought they managed to refrain from that quite well with the violence, and there was a lot of off-camera violence, which I just think that worked more effectively, particularly if you want to compare it to the likes of more obvious torture porn films, like Hostel.
Yeah, I mean, that was certainly my kind of fear when I got the disc through the post and saw some of the packaging and stuff. I was expecting, a pretty run-of-the-mill kind of torture porn movie, really. So I was quite pleased to see the way they developed. When I was saying before, I didn't really question the character development. I thought it was good to see some of the backstory. I just thought, some of the flashbacks were vaguely, a bit of a clumsy way to do it, really. I think there could have been other ways of doing it other than through, kind of the typical cliched nightmare scenes and flashback to youth trauma, really. I just would have liked to have seen, Bob interact maybe more with the outside world and learn more about him that way, maybe.
I mean, if you look at the box and the marketing, they are obviously trying to tap into that torture porn, the Saw, the Hostel, that sort of audience, but I don't really think that's the sort of film that we're dealing with. And I mean,
No.
if they wanted to go for a more representative cover, I think if they'd just put like the empty room, the powder room, and perhaps there's a teddy bear at some point just on its own in one frame.
Yes.
Which I thought worked very well. Now that would have been a much better cover, but I guess you have got to think about the marketing.
Well, this is part of the problem, the whole dumbing down issue, isn't it? Because she originally wanted to call the film Rabbit, but there was no takers for that idea because they said, how are we going to sell a film called Rabbit? And so you're right, it then kind of gets lumped in with the rest of the torture porn movies, and I would certainly agree that this movie is not... It has a lot of dissimilarities with that genre, although it's worth noting, I suppose, that even though a lot of the violence is off-camera, there's a fair amount of violence on camera, and it's all a fat guy killing beautiful women.
I mean, I mentioned this in the interview with Jennifer, but I felt the first time that I watched it, which was at Fright Fest in the cinema, and there's a thread of tension throughout, and you're always on the edge, not quite sure when the violence is going to strike next. But going out of the film, I thought it appeared at that point one of the most violent films at the festival, which is quite a statement from a film where, particularly on a second viewing, you realise, hang on, there's not much on-screen violence at all, but it manages to sustain that feel to it.
Yeah, I mean, I must admit, I mean, I watched it with a friend, and at one point, there is a murder, and he went, "Oh, fucking hell, that's vile," and I was thinking, really? I mean, in terms of other films that are out there, I didn't think that the violence was particularly gratuitous. I just thought it was, to the necessary level to progress the story. I don't think, there was anything over the top about it. And, I thought it was quite realistic violence, if anything. There's nothing, nobody's playing with people's entrails and stuff like that, is there? It's this guy has got the urge to kill, and he takes it on, and he obeys his urge. And once that's kind of sated, that's the end of the matter for him, isn't it, really? He just moves on to the next one.
Did you think that I take it you were referring to the throat slitting on camera?
Yeah, of the blonde.
Yeah.
Blonde prostitute. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
The black dancer, I think she is.
Yeah, and so you've got the kind of whole question then of is violence against women on screen any different in the psychological perception when you know it's being directed by a female? Or does that play a part in it at all?
I must admit, I mean, I didn't come away from it particularly, struck by it being a film directed as a woman. I thought that there was kind of elements to the relationship between Bob and Rabbit as it developed that were maybe more astute than other filmmakers, in terms of the insight emotionally. I thought that was handled very well, but I didn't kind of think of it at that point of thinking, a woman has really kind of sat down and put a kind of female stamp on this film. That wasn't really something that ever crossed my mind whilst I was watching it, I've got to be honest. I'm not sure about what you two guys thought, whether you think about that, man.
No, I mean, I think the fact that you don't really think about it in terms of as a female-directed film, or indeed a film by the daughter of David Lynch, speaks very highly of Jennifer and what she's doing in the genre.
Oh, I got to say that I can't quite endorse that, but simply because right from the very opening of the film, David Lynch's shroud was hanging all over it as far as I could see. Dan, you said something earlier about you didn't know whether the location and the setting was down to a budgetary constraint, which I guess it probably was because of so much interior. But you just look at that interior and it's got Lynch all over. You might as well have had the zigzag flooring, for Christ's sake. I mean, it's got all of the exact same colouring, it's got exact same lighting, it's got the exact same ambience about it. It might as well have been a scene from Twin Peaks, Fire Walk with Me, or Eraserhead, if Eraserhead had been in colour, or, you name it. It's just so Lynchian, with the camera angles being exact, the fixtures and fittings being pretty exact, the lighting, the too bright wall sconces being exact, and it just kind of seemed to me that it was almost strange for somebody who's trying to maybe get out from under the shadow of her father's filmmaking career to have come up with something that to me seemed like such a design statement based on her father's iconography.
Maybe it's just something that, I guess is difficult to get away from if that's something that you spent your time observing as you're growing up, in the industry, with her father being who he is. Maybe, it's not a conscious nod, but it's just, those kind of aesthetics have just come naturally to her based on, what she's seen.
I'd kind of say that...
I'm trying to give her a little bit of
Yeah, of course. Simply because his films are such a matter of public record, and the kind of design aesthetic is so much part of what everybody recognises about a David Lynch film. It's just seemed odd to me that... I don't think it's odd if, for example, she's saying, well, I don't care what people think, and I'm quite happy to make a film that in some ways looks like my father's kind of cinematography and design.
Well, that's exactly, you say somebody that's trying to get away from, maybe that's not what she's trying to do at all.
Exactly.
I mean, do you think she put a distinct enough stamp on it so that you could see that it's clearly a Jennifer Lynch film rather than a David one?
I don't think I could answer that question having only seen Boxing Helena before. I wouldn't say that there's enough familiarity with the way that she does things for me to be able to identify it as a Jennifer Lynch movie. And even if she wants to have something that kind of then puts a thread throughout it that she's looking to be part of the whole auteur debate, I'm not really sure. But I think it was just some kind of a statement to have something that, when your main location for the film is so similar in feel and design aesthetic to something that your father has been peddling for most of his adult life, and with variations based around those themes kind of throughout, it did look like that whole kind of 1950s throwback situation with a kind of slightly gothic, slightly fucked up feel to it. But I think that the rest of the movie narratively, it doesn't feel like a David Lynch movie at all, because I think she's more keen to explain things, and maybe over keen to explain things in some respects, with something that David Lynch himself would never have done, because he would just go for the abstract every time.
I mean, one thing that I didn't like the first time that I watched the film was actually the twist at the end.
Spoiler alert.
See, I'm not sure how much detail to go into this.
Well, I think we have to go into it because I think it's such a massive problem with the film.
I mean, I would say that on the second viewing, I got more out of that, and you noticed the little nods towards it.
I must admit, when he didn't kill the boy in the first, early in the film, when he's abducted the boy's mother and he's kept the boy alive, I kind of wondered why he would do such a thing, and I figured that there must be a plot reason for that. But that notwithstanding, I think that she has gone on record herself, hasn't she, as saying that it was to do with time, it was to do with money, it was to do with running time, it was to do with her not being able to have final cut and her having to deliver a contractual number of minutes for the film. And she has acknowledged that it does feel somewhat tacked on and it does feel somewhat rushed and quick. And I would say that is its chief problem. Two major things happen at the end. So if you don't want to know what they are, then don't listen any further. The first major thing that happens is that once the boy has got rid of the serial killer, he finds out that the serial killer's was his father's brother, and his father had set the whole thing up in the first place to get rid of his mother so he could remarry or have a new life or whatever he wanted. And so he goes to confront his father about this. The way that that's handled is done far too quickly and narratively, with just such a kind of massively rushed, we're trying to cram this into a minute or two of screen time. It just beggars belief. The second thing is that the girl is left, the whole question of the girl and what's happened to the girl is left completely unattended.
I mean, the rush at the end is what really kind of ruined it, I think. I mean, as you say, from the point that he kills the serial killer to the point that the film ends is probably about 4.5 minutes.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a 90-minute film. There's a lot of character development in terms of, we see Rabbit go through his adolescence. We see him go through a horrific ordeal. We see him have a miserable and squalid life at the hands of Bob. We see him get some sort of retribution when he kills the man. And then, the crux of the matter, the thing that started this whole thing, his father's actions, are resolved almost instantly. And I don't think the payoff really, in terms of that character that we've invested so much in and we feel sympathy for, I don't feel that payoff was, deserving of what he's gone through to get to that moment, if you see where I'm going.
Did you feel that there was an inevitability that the way that it was going to end was either Rabbit was going to escape or kill Bob, or Bob was going to eventually kill Rabbit, but because of all of the kind of father issues that Bob had, because of the emotion he was investing in Rabbit, it meant that he wasn't going to kill him at that point because he almost wanted to train him up as his protege, but Rabbit wasn't having any of it, so it perhaps made the ending a little predictable. And do you feel, notwithstanding the twist at the end, that just something more original could have happened?
I do think that the writing was on the wall, because I think the key line was blown because they repeated it a few times, and the key line was when Rabbit says, "I know how your body works." And he's been studying how the human body works. So you figure that he's been studying that with a view to actually knowing how to quickly and efficiently kill someone. And if he's not going to kill the girl, then obviously, who else is there? It's going to have to be Bob, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was nailed on. Almost as soon as you saw Rabbit go from a 9-year-old boy to, I think he was 19, wasn't he, by the end of the film?
Yeah.
I mean, I thought it was nailed on as soon as he became a young man, that he was going to kill Bob. I mean, I thought it was going to go somewhere that Bob was kind of going to put him in a situation maybe where he had his first victim was going to be his own father because of all Bob's father issues and, how he became his surrogate father. I thought maybe that might have been kind of a more effective conflict at the end, but I felt the ending didn't really pay off. I thought it was, you could really see it coming, to be honest.
Well, the worst thing about it
It's
is
a shame.
Again, I read something where she said that the best performance in the film ended up on the cutting room floor, and that was the boy's father when he goes to confront him, because that scene apparently ran about 5 minutes.
Yeah, it needed to. It really did.
And so she's now wanting to do a director's cut that restores the original envisaged running time and keeps that scene intact, so that she says that will make it seem a lot less of a tacked on surprise ending for its own sake, and will be narratively much more joined up and much more believable.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think sometimes, to some extent, even in fiction and in film with horror, I mean, I feel the surprise ending is something that a lot of people yearn for, isn't it? You know, it's not always necessary, and it felt like it wasn't necessary in this film. I mean, I, for one, would watch that director's cut with an extended ending. You know, I felt invested enough in the character of Rabbit to want to see him get, you know, an adequate payoff to the ordeal that he went through.
It was interesting that they felt the need to explain why this serial killer had kidnapped a boy. And it's like, this is a fucking serial killer. It's like he's going around killing people. I mean, not quite at random, because they normally profile to a degree, but these things always seem terribly convenient, that the one that he decided to keep alive for a little bit.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, the trouble with that is then once you start applying logic to a film, then you're screwed, aren't you? Particularly a horror film. So it's like, how come he was able to abduct so many women in modern times with CCTVs everywhere, with observant people who would know that there was a taxi kind of attached to all of this? But to go back to the question you asked, which I think is an interesting one, I think that, it kind of comes back to this dichotomy, this Jennifer Lynch, David Lynch thing, because the film does seem to have a need to explain more than it needs to, for me. And David Lynch himself would never have bothered to explain most of those, because he would have left it up to abstraction. Yet, so she's over-explaining, if anything, maybe as a counterbalance to the fact that her father wouldn't have bothered explaining anything at all and left the audience to form their own opinion without any real kind of guiding hand. But secondly, that the character's name is Bob, who is, if you think of it, pretty much, apart from Frank Booth, David Lynch's most famous character in Twin Peaks. Is that kind of force of nature, serial killer Bob, who can't really be captured, who can't really be figured out, who can't really be dealt with. And yet we've got this all-too-human Bob who, you know, we know, as Dan says, that it was pretty much nailed on, that the writing was on the wall for him, that, you know, the only way that he was going to finish the movie was having been killed by the boy.
A lot of ambiguity would have gone a long way. Well, a little bit of ambiguity would have gone a long way in that film, for me, I think.
Yeah, I think so. So overall, do we rate it as a hit or a miss?
You know, I think it's worth watching. I'd recommend people watch it. I'd recommend... I've noted down a few films that I feel you could compare to a certain degree, and I'd say it would be for fans of Jack Ketchum, Lucky McGee's The Woman, and of course Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer. Interesting.
What about you, Dan? Do you rate it?
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I was going to when it fell through the letterbox. I'm not going to lie. I feel I would probably enjoy a director's cut, as we discussed, more than the current ending. But I would still recommend it, without a doubt. I think the character development is there. You know, you're emotionally invested in the film to quite a large extent. So yeah, I'd recommend it.
And funnily enough, after all the carping I've been doing about it, I would recommend it too. I think that Vincent D'Onofrio's performance... I mean, Vincent D'Onofrio is great in everything. You know, you only have to see what he did with a really thankless role in Men in Black with the mad farmer that's been inhabited by the strange alien, but and how brilliant he is at physical comedy. But he was great as a serial killer in The Cell also. He was great as Orson Welles in Ed Wood. And I think he's always worth watching, and you know he brings a lot of layering and depth to a performance that, you know, without him would probably have made the film pretty much threadbare. And I do think that there's some gorgeous looking exterior photography in it, because the locations were in Saskatchewan, weren't they? They weren't in States. So she tried to get a decent out-of-the-way place that would also somehow manage to fall into the Canadian tax regime favourability. And I think it looks great.
I tell you what, that house must be worth a fortune.
Yeah.
The views there are absolutely fantastic.
My favourite shot in the movie, I think there's one shot in the movie that just sort of encapsulates the fact that it just has got a really nice way of putting things on the screen, and that is the shot out in the field when he stops the taxi in the middle of the crossroads and then gets out, walks around, and then punches the woman unconscious, gets back into the taxi, and then drives off again. That, in its design, in what happens in the scene, in the casual way that it happens, but also the beautiful symmetry, the beautiful framing, the gorgeous colours in it and everything, which, of course, is a total counterpoint to the dingy surroundings that most of the rest of the film takes place in. I think that she's got something. I think that she's certainly not quite there yet, but I'd certainly look for more of her material. I will look back at Surveillance and see, what else she gets up to.
Yeah, I would recommend Surveillance, as I said at the start of the show, for anyone that hasn't seen it. And I mean, much like the format of Chained, it is layered in quite a similar way.
Okay.
But I think the less we say about that, the better. Just go out and bloody watch it.
Will do.
So are there any other thoughts that we want to bounce around on Chained, not just generally? This is a horror show. We're not going to just shoot the shit about whatever.
Do you think that the performance of the young boy and the older boy kind of joins up? Does it matter? Should it join up?
I think physically they did a good job of getting, they're both quite unique-looking young gentlemen, aren't they? Particularly the older rabbit. I thought they did a good job in that term. The older rabbit was a lot more downtrodden, wasn't he? I mean, he had a lot more emotional range to play. I mean, the child at the end of the day is panicked and upset, but, you're dealing with a boy, a 19-year-old young man who's got quite a range to play. I thought he did a reasonable job, to be fair. There are only two performances really in this film, aren't there, at the end of the day? I mean, there's Bob and there's Rabbit. Everybody else is periphery. I thought they had a believable relationship between the two of them. I thought they interacted well. I didn't have a problem with him. What about you, Michael?
I mean, would either of you say that Rabbit as a 19-year-old was perhaps a little sharper? And again, I'm kind of going back to realism and logic, which I should probably stray away from. Then he would plausibly be, bearing in mind that he's been locked up in this house, effectively in this room for 10 years or so. Also, very convenient that they'd managed to buy him an identical suit that now fits him when he's 19.
Yeah, I didn't think about that, actually.
Wasn't that a present from Bob?
Oh, no, not literally the suit.
Oh, right.
But just an identical outfit. So it goes from the younger Rabbit to the teenage Rabbit, and they're wearing the same clothes.
I must admit, I didn't notice that.
No, very, very observant observation there, mate. That's got past me completely. Well done.
On the subject of bringing realism to it, I think that's probably, as we say, best strayed away from him horror. But realistically, would any male character, would they not try and escape over and over and over and over again?
Yeah, he did. He accepted his fate quite easily, didn't he? I mean, I guess as a child, maybe you would have that fear of retribution and that fear of violence, but surely as he got older and developed, as a person, surely he would have just realised that there was nothing for him to lose by trying to escape. He was told that he'd be killed, but, as far as he knew, he was going to be locked up there for the rest of his life. So, at the end of the day, if you die, you probably just saved yourself 30 or 40 years locked in this house. And what happened if Bob had a sudden heart attack and died in his chair? You know, he would have just starved to death in that kitchen once the food ran out. So, yeah, to not try to escape probably more than, I think it was the twice that it did actually happen. Yeah, maybe that was a bit of a hole in proceedings, I reckon.
I think in the second half, as we said before, Bob is much more attached to Rabbit, so you could argue that Rabbit has latched onto that and is waiting for the opportune moment. I mean, I wonder if realistically he would have just made a run for it when he was out in the taxi. It's like, come on, he's pulled over, the cops are coming. Yes, you've somehow managed to write a note on the taxi, which they conveniently didn't explain at any point.
No, and it was in blood as well, it looked like.
But yeah, at the point, yeah, you got to write it in blood, haven't you?
Where did he get the blood
just
from?
The rules.
I don't recall seeing him bleeding profusely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, that's what we didn't see when he stabbed the girl. He actually bottled some of her blood specifically for that message. That will be in the director's cut, I believe.
Hope so.
But yeah, at that point, the taxi is slowed down. The cops are there. Might as well get out and make a run for it. Because if Bob runs after and floors him, well, looks like somebody's going to be doing more than a little bit of jail time.
Well, meanwhile, we've got two guys in a taxi that's managed to drive all the way through a town from a rural area with a big help on its side in blood, and nobody's noticed it.
Yeah.
To be fair, the only person it showed driving past was some cracked up prostitute, so probably thought she was hallucinating anyway.
Which is interesting, seeing as they were going to a campus, weren't they?
Yeah, supposedly.
Were you saying you've not seen some cracked up prostitutes walking around Warwick University?
No comment.
For the writers' events.
Why do you think John?
I might have propositioned a few.
Oh, God. No, so that's a recommendation then from the This Is Horror team. So check it out.
Do we want to give it marks out of 5 or 10 or whatever?
I was thinking about this earlier, and we all agree that any sort of rating system is so fucking pretentious and arbitrary. So if we were going to give a rating, we might as well use a system that is so abstract that you won't get a meaning from it either, because it is meaningless to have ratings if you haven't, worked out what we think to the film.
A Lynchian rating system.
Yeah.
Take away the number you first thought of.
I just thought maybe we could give like an object with no sort of...
What, it's like an orange?
Yeah, well, a black glove maybe.
Black glove.
You go.
Okay, fair enough.
I give it a black glove out of orange.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, so if that's fair.
Yeah, I'll give it half a caravan size.
Yeah, Dan, how would you rate it?
I'd probably give it a case of silverware.
Okay, yeah, that's a pretty good rating, actually.
Yeah, I thought so.
Okay, well, thank you fucking hell. I don't know if
I'm so glad I'm not in the room.
Genuinely, thank you for listening to this. We apologise if you've just lost a large portion of your time that you will never get back, but...
Yeah. Sorry you're traumatised.
If you got something out of this, then tune in next time in a fortnight, where...
We'll be doing it on acid.
Yes. And talking of acid, Joseph DeLacy will be with us.
Yes.
And he will be bringing the acid.
Cool.
So yeah, vegan acid, I believe.
That's all right.
Yeah.
Blood acid.
Yeah.
Now for our interview with Jennifer Lynch.
Okay, well, thank you very much for joining me for this special interview. I wanted to focus on Chain today. which is being released next month. I actually caught it at Fright Fest earlier this year in the UK.
Woo!
Had to be one of the standout films at Fright Fest.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear you say that. Thank you so much.
And I just rewatched it yesterday on DVD, and it was luckily just as good as I remember.
Oh, thank God, right?
But I don't like Surveillance. What I found on a second viewing was you actually got quite a lot of comedic moments and kind of nods towards the audience that you just wouldn't get the first time.
Exactly.
So I wanted to talk about the dark comedy in both of the films, both Surveillance and Chained.
That is very intentional, and I realize I'm taking a risk by not having that be obvious on first viewing. But that's okay with me. I hope people will see it twice and see that I am attempting humor in a dark way, but that I'm not trying to make the subject matter laughable, but to honor the fact that sometimes violence can be incredibly absurd, and that every once in a while a chuckle, no matter how nervous, can sort of save your life.
And what do you think it is that make comedy and horror such kind of easy bedfellows, as it were?
What does it mean? I don't know, but they're two of my greatest loves. So I guess that's why they seem to fit together to me. And moments like in Chained, there's a few obvious ones, but one of the ones that always gets me, and I'm quite often the only person in the audience laughing when it happens, but when Vincent is smashing his hand into his head, asking Rabbit if he's trying to make him fucking insane.
Yeah.
The suggestion that it's the kid trying to make him insane that is so absurd, and yet that character believes that and wants to know, like, are you really trying to drive me crazy, kid? But that's so human, and there's so much ha-ha in people being wrong sometimes. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think the line that you've just highlighted had to be one of my favourites, and kind of coupled with that, and I think, in fact, as in the same speech, as it were, he's like, "You have got to get laid. You're getting fucked up in the head."
A friend of mine read the script when I'd finished it, and he said, "Oh my God, Jen, the fact that you have him telling the kid he's got to get laid because he's getting fucked up in the head has got to be one of the best things ever." And I said, yeah, but I think he believes that. I think Bob actually believes it'll clear his head to get fucked. That'll straighten you right out. That'll put her and you in your place. But yeah, those and Vincent's delivery is so exactly what I wanted. And so authentic. Bob's got to believe everything he says. And Vincent has done that masterfully.
And as I guess would be inevitable in this sort of film, there's almost a Stockholm syndrome that comes into play. But
absolutely.
I noticed that Vincent's character, in fact, seemed to be very attached to Rabbit, which I'd say was a little more unusual in these situations.
Yeah, and I appreciate you noticing that. I think that there was a very conscious attempt on my part to, again, even in the first viewing, hopefully it reads that Vincent seems as invested in Rabbit as Rabbit needs to be in him. And ultimately, on the second viewing, you realize that when Bob is sitting at the kitchen table and asks Rabbit, did your father toss a ball around with you in the backyard, after school or on Sundays? He's asking about his own brother. He's asking about the kid that he protected as they were both children. He took the hits and the bullets, if you were, for his brother, so he didn't have to. And And now he is without his brother, and all that brother thinks of him is that he's a dumping ground for his wife and son. So he's, the boy that took all those hits is still inside Bob and is lonely and longs for his brother and also longs for a playmate, and yet is in the body of this grown man who's angry and has become a monster filled with pain and rage. And so there's as much wanting to parent the boy as corrupt him and impart damage on him, as much as, ask him questions and play games with him. And so I think, hopefully in there's a real sense that he does need Rabbit. He keeps him alive not just to groom him to do bad things, but in fact to be a companion that he's longed for since he lost his brother.
And do you think that Bob's desire to have a father-son bond with Rabbit is almost a type of therapy for him to deal with his own father issues?
Absolutely. And, I think that it's to handle that lost relationship in his own childhood by being what he thinks is a good parent. Because without an education, you're fucked. This sort of after-school special soundbite type of education is all Bob had. In between beatings, that's what he got. And so he's trying to be different, and yet he's repeating the same cycle. So, yeah, but I think it's very therapeutic. I think that Bob will never get better, but he's trying. The human spirit is such that even in a broken mass of emotions and bones, there is always the yearning to be loved and to not be alone.
And speaking about broken humans, obviously a lot of your film, nice
Speaking
topic.
of broken humans.
Just a nice little lead in there.
Yeah.
So, a lot of your films are about the dark and the light, the good and the bad, as indeed I think most, decent and real films are.
Right.
But do you think, in terms of the world that we live in, is there too much emphasis on punishment and a lack of actually looking into rehabilitation and understanding where this darkness comes from and the circumstances which create it?
So let me clarify. You're asking, do I think in the real world, is there a lack of emphasis on what is causing all these things and how to stop it and rehabilitate?
Yeah. That's quite a deep question.
Yeah. Yes, I do. I think that, and that's why, it's a movie after all. I'm not trying to cure cancer, but I did want to try within the entertainment and the horror to do my best to create a dialogue about, child abuse, because that to me is how real monsters are made. And we have absolutely no business behaving shocked when someone behaves badly and hurts others if we know they've been hurt as a child. So we have to go to the source, which is the abusers. And because the abusers were more often than not abused themselves, it's this cycle of damage. And it doesn't make it okay, but it explains it. And we know enough that we should be paying attention to that. I don't know if pedophiles or killers can ever be rehabilitated, but we can certainly rescue children from situations where that behavior becomes contagious.
In terms of the violence and the behavior and the way that both Rabbit and women are treated at the hands of Bob, I felt that whilst I was watching it at Fright Fest and reflecting that it seemed one of the most violent films there, but actually, rewatching it is tense. There's just this thread of tension throughout, but actually there's not that much on-screen violence, but what is on-screen, fuck.
Yeah.
That hits you.
Yeah, I mean, I knew I was setting out to make something horrific, and what I wanted to do was sort of dance between what I think are the most powerful things, which is I am incredibly disappointed in how palatable most films make violence. Not that can't be enjoyable in your action flick, but the reason I shy away from torture porn is that's not sexy to me and that's not scary to me. It's just repellent. What I think is really important about violence is that it feels bad. It should feel bad. Violence is not good. And that I think most of the power in violence is hearing it and the suggestion of it. So I wanted to credit the audience with being able to come up with more horrific things than I could create and give them their independence, to see what they wanted to see, what scared them, what were they afraid was going on behind the garage door when Rabbit is hearing his mother die. So I wanted to, treat the audience as intelligent and give them their own voice in it, as much as really sell the fact that this is a terrible situation. I wasn't going to make it easy to watch, and the tension to me is, someone came up to me and said, I was so uncomfortable, and I said, well, it's a really terrible story. I wanted you to be uncomfortable. If it felt like a soft, cushy chair, I would be doing the story a great disservice. So, it shouldn't be easy to watch, but it should feel like it's about what it's about, which is, a very broken, sick man who's a real live monster, a human monster, keeps a boy after killing his mother. And for 10 years, they lived together in a small house in the middle of nowhere. That should feel pretty crummy.
So I heard that initially this script was a torture porn script that you were given, and you actually had to make a lot of cuts from it as well.
I did, what I had to do, and I was, like most people, I need jobs. Jobs are good. The life provides bills, and I need to pay them. I was, sent the script for Chained, and I was, really intrigued by the idea of a killer who drove a taxi cab and the kidnapping of the boy. But I didn't gravitate towards the way the man killed. There was no understanding of the killer within that. There was an entire B story where detectives were pursuing the killer of all these women. And to me, it was a lot more frightening to think of Bob getting away with it, and of being trapped in the house along with Rabbit. The only time we leave there is in bits and pieces when Bob goes out or when they go out together. Otherwise, we are just as captive as Rabbit is. And what I changed, mostly was each death, I think, represents how Bob suffered and what he thinks power is and what he thinks hurts. And sometimes to impart wisdom on the boy in a terrible way, he kills. But I wanted to know why, and so I created the nightmare, and I removed the detectives because that just wasn't... I've seen that movie. I hadn't seen this one. I wanted to deal more with the actual people rather than cutting pieces of women off and letting them die slowly. That just seemed unnecessary to me.
And were there any particularly real-life serial killers which inspired this film, or which you researched into?
I didn't do any research. I think, Damien might have a different answer to this, or I'm sure he does. I don't know if Damien researched serial killers. The sad truth is that, it's a thing that happens in reality. People are taken and seemingly, they disappear, but they are held captive and bad things happen. That's a real thing. But what I did was, both out of respect for those real life cases, I didn't want to try and assume I knew what they had gone through. What I did was what I try to do with each piece I write and direct, which is, if I were this person, what would I do and why would I do it? And I do that for every character in every movie. So, really the situation was based on the original script, which I thought was incredibly potent. And the behavior of those involved is based on what I thought I would do if I were them with this kind of damage. And, something I hadn't seen before and explored before.
And how do you feel the soundtrack from the Climax Golden Twins really adds to the mood?
They are so fucking brilliant. Rob Mills is one of the great composers ever, if you ask me. And I so deeply appreciate how he understood what I wanted. Less is more for me. I love low beds of tone, and to me also there's a great power in how loud silence can be. And so I really wanted to play with how scary it can be when there isn't crazy music playing and there isn't something leading you to feel a certain way. You're watching something happen as if someone's taking a chicken out of the oven, but in fact it's a woman being killed. So Rob is a genius, and I'm so grateful to have collaborated with him.
And will the soundtrack be getting a release on iTunes?
God, that is a great question. It sure would be nice if it did. I'll have to ask. I still haven't been sent a copy of my own movie, so
No.
My fiance had to buy it.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah, so I, in fact, the only reason I own Boxing Helena, Surveillance, and Chained is because my fiance bought them. I don't know. I'll have to ask. I'll have to, I'll have to find out about that. But that would be wonderful. Rob deserves it, and I think the film deserves it. And I'm so thrilled that the UK was brave enough to release the film in theaters for however long, because nobody else did. And I'm incredibly grateful. I mean, it was a relatively low budget, shot in 15 days, and all the money went on screen, and it should be seen big and loud. So I'm thrilled that you were, that you enjoyed it a second time and that it still carried its own weight.
I just think it says quite a lot about the cinema in terms of how safe they seem to be with what they show, and it's just a tragedy, really. That
I know, and the fact that I was given an NC-17 here until I spent the entire budget of my director's cut painting out the throat slit when Mary dies. It's just, and they just kept telling me, well, it just feels too real. And yet, all sorts of terrible things happen in R-rated movies, and yet that's okay because it's made sexy or funny. And I would much rather my child see a violent film that feels violent and then has a discussion with me afterwards. Because, I think there's more damage done to kids when violence is made palatable and they don't know how awful it really is. And that's the poison, not exposure to how horrible things can be.
I thought a way that you really illustrated the violence with the real world was, in fact, this frame in the powder room, as it was affectionately called, and it zooms in on the teddy bear. I just thought that was a great way of just juxtaposing violence and calm.
Thank you.
So, I mean, did anything inspire that disturbing image, as it were?
I mean, because I think film in general, cinema in general, is the most public and permissive sort of taboo in the world. It is voyeurism at its purest. We go and pay money to sit in a dark room silently and watch other people live out their lives. That is essentially legal peeping Tomism. And I think that I love the idea of normal things becoming frightening. People who look safe and average can be very dangerous. Who knows what's happened to them and what choices they're making. I've always thought if I could make a teddy bear or a toothbrush frightening, I win. And so I think that the powder room and language like that and the teddy bear nanny cam and a little farmhouse in the middle of nowhere are great things to sort of make a bit haunting or have people question.
I noticed as well your little cameo as the cooking show host. Are we going
What's funny about that is I had been told by the producers, we have no money for stock footage. It's over. We're done. We can't do anything. And one of the producers had a flip cam. And so we got a little fake kitchen set up. And in one take, I just did a fake cooking show with a cigarette hanging on my mouth. And there it was. Free footage.
So will we be seeing any more cameos like that in the future?
It depends on whether or not there's a budget.
Yeah.
If I can hire an actor, you probably won't be seeing me again. I'm actually in Boxing Elena as well as one of the party guests. And I'm in the back seat of the station wagon in every single shot in surveillance. I'm under the blue blanket in the back seat, but other than that, who knows?
And speaking of casting, I understand that you did quite a lot of the casting via Skype. This interview is via Skype as well. So, is Skype, significant for cinema in the future?
Well, I tend to have a differing opinion than most filmmakers in regards to auditions and rehearsals. What's most important to me about working with people is, can we communicate? So I'm not concerned about their audition tape as much as I am, do we understand each other? Are we going to get along? If I say this, do they hear that? And so, it was very easy for me, whatever it is, it was very clear to me that both Evan and Eamon, and of course Vincent, who were all hired over Skype or the phone, were the perfect people for the job. And I deeply dislike rehearsals. I think they're mood killers. So I think conversations are great. I think blocking while doing sort of flat line readings is great, so everybody feels solid and knows where they're going. But the first time actors go for it, they should feel that I've trusted them, that they've communicated with me, that I've heard them and they've heard me. It's a collaboration, and I'm rolling the camera when they first go for it, because I never want to say to an actor, can we go again and can you do what you did in that rehearsal? That's just toxic and terrible. And so, yes, everybody should know their places, and we do a rehearsal for them and for camera, but especially with emotionally weighted material, it's no good. And so I think that starting with conversations and us learning to trust each other immediately, I owe a great debt to Skype for that.
So is a lot of what we're seeing first take material then when we're looking at Chained and Surveillance?
Yes.
Awesome.
A lot of a lot of it is we've all been talking, everybody's excited, and I rarely do more than 3 takes. I'm usually between 1 and 2 and a third in case an actor says, that thing we discussed, can I try one of those? My job is to have a plan so that plan can change. Spontaneity is so magical, and I just need to make sure I'm telling the story that I set out to tell. But once I've written a character and actors step into that skin, they have something to tell me about them too. So I need to listen to that. So you are seeing in most cases, either the first or third take.
And speaking of actors adding to the character, I just couldn't have imagined anyone apart from Vincent playing Bob. He just absolutely nailed it.
I know. That guy, wow. Dream come true. And Vincent, he's just so completely brave and genuine. And again, we had discussions, and really what I said to Vincent was that Bob is not a stupid man by any stretch. Bob has been hit in the head so many times and made so frightened and panicked so many times that he comes off slow, like a boxer who's had too many fights. And his body is surprisingly heavy on his bones, and words, it's hard for him to get the words to come out the way he thinks they should sound. But that little child in him that was so deeply abused is still there, and the top of that boy's head is where his belly begins. So always know he's right there. And he's from Anywhere, America. And that was essentially it. I just wanted him to really feel how heavy his body was with his gait, and to show me that there was a struggle to say things, but that he wasn't an idiot. He was a damaged child, and part of him was frozen as a boy, and another part of him was a very grown-up, wounded man. And Vincent, did the rest. I mean, he got it. He just got it, and I knew he got it. And from that, moment on, we had, there were only a couple times where we had to converse about certain things, because I would see something and I'd get a look on my face and I'd get an idea, and I'd go over to Vincent and I'd say, okay, I have an idea. It's not in the script, but I think it should be in the movie. And he'd listen to me and nod, and I could tell he was, absorbing it, because on many occasions these ideas were a little rough, and he was going to have to really trust me. And he would nod his head and he'd say, all right, I'm going to do that once. And I said, okay, I'm going to shoot it. And all those moments are in the movie.
And will you be working with Vincent again on future releases?
I will. He's in my next picture as well. Playing an entirely different kind of character, which will be really fun for people to see, I think. And he will be co-starring with Tim Roth and several other magical actors.
Is this Fall from Grace?
It is.
And what can you tell us about it?
Tim Roth is the lead, and he plays a homicide detective who has been shot in the line of duty while attempting to find the killer of these young children and young girls. And he's failed miserably at it, according to himself, because the girls are still dying. But both because of the pain he has emotionally, there's a lot of family wreckage for him, and the physical pain, he has become deeply addicted to drugs and alcohol. and yet he is still trying to sort of save his own life before he sort of kills himself. And it's his pursuit of this killer, along with the multitude of dynamics there are in a wrecked and wounded man's life. In other words, it's another romantic comedy.
And have you got any plans for writing and directing for television?
I do. Last year I did 4 episodes of TV, and they were a blast. 3 episodes of the comedy Psych, and 1 episode of Warehouse 13, and both of them have been picked up again, so I'm hoping to go back. I love television. I think it's an even more intimate way to be voyeuristic, because now we have these moments in our own home, in our underwear, that we can stop and start at will, where we're watching other people. And that is incredibly naughty, but allowed. And I think people like that. And I think television is able to do, in many ways, what films seem to have stopped doing, which is be a little more brave. I think most theatrically released films are either very, very tiny or very, very, very big. And that doesn't seem right to me. There's no middle class of films, if you will.
And what television series that are current would you say are your favourites at the moment?
I've got 3. Breaking Bad, Sherlock, and Luther.
You know, I'd definitely be with you on Breaking Bad. I think cinematically it is the best television show out there.
Right? But just completely seamless.
You know, Jen, thank you very much for all your time today.
Thank you.
I think I've taken up quite a lot of your time, but it's been an absolute
it's been really
pleasure.
fun. Thank you so much.
And all the best for the release of Chained. I hope everybody else really gets it, and let's get
Thanks.
it.
I mean, and if you can let people know that it's just as good, if not better, and a little bit different the second time, that would be a huge help to me.
Oh yeah, I'll be including it in my write-up on This Is Horror, so watch this space.
Fantastic.
Okay, thank you very much.
You.
A pleasure.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your night.
Yes, you too. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.
And that was our interview with Jennifer Lynch. Chained will be available on DVD and Blu-ray from the 4th of February this year. It stars Vincent D'Onofrio, Julia Ormond and Eamon Farren. Thank you for listening to the This Is Horror podcast. We hope you've had a great time. Don't forget to check the show notes where we've got links to Amazon to buy Chained and all sorts of resources from this week's podcast. And of course, if you want to get the latest reviews, news, interviews and all that is horror, then check out www.thisishorror.co.uk. If you go onto the site and you sign up for the newsletter, you can get our free What is Horror ebook, and it contains contributions from Stephen Graham Jones, Gary McMahon, Tana Nivo, and many other respected horror writers. So thanks again, and catch us next episode.